In this video, I want to outline an example workflow for creating sketch renders in Procreate. Every time I do a sketch render in Procreate, I always follow a similar process. So here I've broken this down into a step-by-step workflow that you can replicate for your own sketches. Step 1 is sketching. Of course, before you can create any kind of presentation renders, you'll want to explore your design and use all of the same techniques as you would when you're working on paper. You can use as many layers as you want to explore your concepts, different views, angles, and experiment with different design variations. When you have a design that you like, you can use two-point perspective to present your design from a nice angle. You can do this using light pen pressure first and focusing on exploration and experimenting with what looks best for your design. To work in a non-destructive way, you can use new layers whenever you want to attempt something different or start sketching a new part of the design. This way you can go back, hide, edit, and change what you've done in different layers to build your final sketch. Step 2 is to create a cleaned up drawing. Once you're happy with your sketch, you can start to make a cleaned up version in a new layer. You can do this by grouping your rough sketch and reducing the opacity to use it as an underlay. This will allow you to make a tidied up version of your sketch, as now you know exactly where you want the lines to be, and you can focus on creating clean lines with a controlled line weight. I always like to keep my rough drawing slightly visible underneath, at least a little bit, as I think this gives the final render more character. You can use a technical pen to create a stronger line weight if you want to. However, I usually just use the pencil and control the line weight as I would with a regular pen and paper. Step 3 is to add base colours. So once you have your cleaned up drawing, you can start to add base colours for each area of your sketch. You can separate different areas into as many layers as you want to make it easier to add shading and value to each area of your sketch. Separating different parts of the design into new layers will make it a lot easier to add things like shadows and highlights later. Step 4 is to construct your lighting and shading zones. Before you add value to your sketch, you can use the same construction techniques as you would with traditional sketching to plan which areas will be in shadow and which areas will be in highlights. You can do this by thinking about shading zones, first by choosing your light source and light direction, and then by planning which areas will be in direct light and which will be cast shadows, or which areas of the design will be hidden from the light. You can do this in a new layer and simply outline where you want these areas to be. Step number 5 is adding value, highlights and shadows. So now we can start to add shadows and highlights to the sketch by changing the value. You can add shading to each separate area using the base colours that we made earlier, or by creating a new layer on top of everything and adding overall highlights and shadows. I usually use a bit of both of this in all of my sketches, starting with separated shadows and highlights and then adding final touches later. You can do this by creating a clipping mask above each of your base colour layers, setting the layer to soft light blend mode, and then by using a hard or a soft airbrush with a black colour for shadows and a white colour for highlights. You can change the opacity of the layers to make the effect more subtle if you need to. You can do the same thing on top of your whole sketch by creating a new layer, setting the blend mode to soft light, and then using a soft blend airbrush to add shadows or highlights. Step number 6 is adding textures and material effects. Again, you can do this with a clipping mask layer, or just on top of everything and erase the bits that you don't want. You can use a brush like Grid or Decimals, or you can even import a texture that you find online and then set the blend mode to overlay or multiply and either mask or erase the areas that you don't want. You can change the opacity of the imported texture to give a more subtle effect. For objects made from materials like glass or chrome, you can add details to make them look like more reflective materials. You can use gradients, imported image textures, or add highlights on edges with a white brush to give the appearance of a more reflective material. Adding presentation details and final cleanup. So now that the sketch is almost finished, you can add presentation details like a background or a ground shadow. You can also add any final details to the sketch by zooming in, cleaning up edges, or adding more line weight to further define shapes in your design. Image editing. So now that you have your finished sketch, you can group or flatten the whole sketch and add image editing effects like you would in Photoshop. So here you can use tools like the Curves tool to increase the contrast, or using the Hue, Saturation and Brightness tool to alter some of the colours and make fine adjustments. Step number 9 is exporting and saving your sketch. So you can export your finished sketch in a number of different ways, either by exporting as the file type that you want to in the Share tab, which is in the Actions toolbar, or simply by taking a screenshot. So this is just an example of a workflow that I use when I do any kind of digital sketching and sketch renders, and this is something that you can use as a guide when you're working on your own sketches and your own renderings.